everybody. We have kind of a 1 minute warning before we get started. We're on track to start right at 2, so stand by. Okay, everybody, it is 2 o'clock and we are on time. We are so excited about what Emma and Kyle have to present today, so we want to get the full hour in there. Thank you so much for attending this webinar on nonprofit websites. You're going to learn a ton of great stuff about how your content and your user experience will help, or tweaking your content and user experience will help you generally online. Before we get started, let me introduce myself and who I am and who I work for. I'm Abby Jarvis. I'm part of the team over here at QGive. We love working with nonprofits of all sizes to raise more money online, and that's why this webinar is so exciting for us. If you are a QGive client, I know there are a number of you on the line right now. If you have questions for how to apply what you'll learn from Emma and Kyle to your QGive form, let me know and we can get you in touch with the right person. And if you don't work with QGive, that's totally fine. Everything that you will learn today will also apply to your fundraising efforts. And if you have questions about how this would work with the QGive platform, we can answer that too. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping pieces that I just wanted to remind you of. We are recording the webinar. So the webinar is going to be posted and emailed to you, usually within 1 to 2 business days. And in that email, you'll also get links to any resources that might be useful for you and that tie into this topic. If you have questions throughout the webinar, feel free to ask those. There's a chat box. I'll keep an eye on your questions and we'll answer all of those at the end of the presentation. If you are a Twitter user, you can follow along with us on that hashtag there, QWebinar. And I also included QGive's handle and Elevation's handle, just so you can, if you just totally love what you see, you can come follow us and learn more. All right, with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and make Emma and Kyle the presenters. They are absolutely some of the kindest people you'll ever hear from, and they have a ton of fantastic information to share with you. So Emma and Kyle, take it away.
Thank you so much, Abby, for that awesome introduction.
Yeah, thank you for those kind words. We appreciate it.
So just to reintroduce ourselves again, I'm Emma. I'm the Content Marketing Growth Manager here at Elevation.
And I'm Kyle. I'm the Growth and Partnerships Manager here at Elevation as well.
And just to let you know, Elevation is a full-service web design company. We specialize in nonprofit web design because we really believe that nonprofit websites are essential for telling your story digitally and just helping you change the world and make even more change.
And to help put some faces to our names here, we have emoji of our teacher picture here for you guys with some classroom style emojis, because we're really excited to be here today with QGive, and we're excited to be presenting for you.
Yes, exactly. We have a little prom picture.
Alrighty, so before we go ahead and get started into kind of the meat of today's presentation, we wanted to give you some key takeaways that we want you to have for today. So the first of those being kind of what UX or user experience is and why it's so important. For some of you, this might be a new concept. For others, it might not be, but we want to go over that for sure. And we'll talk about what the UX process and what a UX report might look, what it might look like for you. Excuse me. And we'll define terms like user groups, sitemap, and wireframe, and show you some examples of that. And then we're going to talk about what we mean by content, how to create quality content, whether that be written or visual. And we'll be looking at some examples on the way through, and then at the end in a little more detail as well. So let's go ahead and jump right into user experience, or UX. So essentially, to give kind of a basic rundown of what UX is, we can think of it as a person's emotions about using any kind of product, really, whether it be a website or an app or an in-store experience at a mall, whatever that might be, whatever that person's experience is with whatever you're selling. Obviously, in this case, we'll be talking about websites and how people interact with that. And this focuses on the user and what their values are, what their capabilities are, and the limitations too. So this helps you to understand how your person is going to interact with that, and kind of what you can do to make that as easy as possible for them. And lastly, we want to say that it is an interaction between human and computer. And this is important for us too, because we are talking about technology, but we have to remember that that people are using this technology. So we have to keep some kind of human element in there and make sure that we're keeping that in mind. So if you do get into user experience at some point, a typical consultation will include defining your user groups. So that might be something like volunteers, because you have volunteers who need to do certain actions on your website. Maybe you have a group of volunteers who needs to log their volunteer hours on your page, and that's a defined user group and action that they need to do. And based on that, you'll kind of map out the navigation paths and strategically organize your content to make sure that they can easily get to that action. And this is so important because it gives you the opportunity to define those actions, write them down, have them in a report, have them on file to say, this is what our website is for. This also finalizes your content sitemap, and it gives you the basic structure for your design once you do get to that portion as well. So first, we'll look at this thing called user groups. And to define user groups, you'll ask yourself questions like, who is coming to my site? What do they need from my site? Are they donating, or are they registering for services or events? And the image there on the right is an example that we've taken from a UX report that we did for a client of ours called Roots and Wings. So let's go ahead and take a little bit of a more deeper look at that. So like I said, this came from Roots and Wings. They are an organization out of New Jersey who helps youth that have aged out of the foster system kind of get their feet on the ground. And they're a great organization, go check them out. And one of their key user groups that they identified were funders. And they identified funders as individuals or organizations willing to help financially. And we see that in that very left box there at the top. And they have this written down, and we know that there's a financial component to this. We know that they need to eventually donate or get involved via events or social media, and those are the goals for that user group. So in order to get them to those goals, what are the top informational needs that user group has? So in that same box on the left, in order of importance, you see that those funders need to know about us. They need to know the impact of the organization, and they need to know what challenges the organization is addressing in order to get to the donate, the event registration, and then eventually news and social media. And then in that bottom right corner there, you'll see that paragraph that says that this is an important audience and that they should find pathways into all of these pieces of information on the homepage. Initially, they're going to want to learn more about the organization. They're going to want to know about those challenges and the successes that the organization has had too. And then from there, that's when they're able to get engaged through donations, through events, and social media.
And I just want to point out that by doing this ahead of time, one of the big points of, defining these user groups is to create, like we're saying, an overall wonderful user experience, but it's ease of use. You're making it as easy as possible for this user group to access the information they need.
Exactly. And keeping them in mind and what their needs are first is always the most important. And so continuing along with that, the next kind of term and definition that we'll look at is sitemap. And your sitemap is going to be the foundation for your content. It will be that main menu that you have on your website, that main navigation bar. And this is where you'll be able to strategically place all of those pages based on the user groups, similarly to the ones that we looked at before. And something like this does require a content audit of what currently exists on your site or within your organization. And we have a little asterisk there, as Emma will be coming back to that point later on.
We will definitely be talking more about content audits, very important.
And so again, this is an example from Roots and Wings that we see there, and we will go ahead and take a deeper look at this one. So at the very top, you see that we have the homepage. That's kind of going to be where people are initially landing on your website. It's going to be that first kind of impression, so to speak. And then below that, in points 1.0 through 4.0, we have the different main headers for the navigation menu. So if we think back to that funders user group that we just saw, we know that learning about us, about the challenge, and about their impact and success are some of the most important pieces of information that they need. So that's why you'll see the challenge listed as 1.0, that very first one there. You'll see impact listed second. And within those sub items as well, you have the history of the organization, you have information about the team and the staff, and then even those testimonials as well, which they have called those inspirational stories. So that's where these funders can come and initially get that information pretty quickly. And then on the other half, you'll see programs and resources and get involved. Obviously, the list of resources is another important piece of information, so we want to have that highlighted. And then get involved is there too, but towards the very end for those who already know how they want to get involved, or at least they know that they need to get involved, and that's where they can go directly to find that. And then kind of this is how the sitemap kind of looks once you get to the website. So this is a little bit of the pre and post UX report there. So this is a screenshot that we've taken from their site. As you can see, we've got those different main headers that we just saw before. We've got the subheaders once you hover over each one of them. This one is what the programs and resources section looks like. And we've also got that donate button that's up in the top right corner. That's something that you always want to have present because you never want to take away the opportunity for someone to be giving to you.
Yeah, donation should always be one click away, no matter where someone is in your website.
Exactly. We always want that to be present.
And I just want to point out that depending on what your organization and how your UX report, if you end up doing one, ends up working out, you might have a different navigation menu. Yours could look completely different than Roots and Wings.
Exactly. Yours might be larger or smaller. It might include different things and options, right. and that's okay too.
Organization specific.
All right, so then the last piece of the UX report that you might look at is something called a wireframe. And a wireframe is essentially a grayscale structure of what your design will look like once you've added things like pictures and colors and branding and all of that fun stuff. You'll have a wireframe for each of the templates that you have. So that will include your home page, your interior page, maybe you have a custom events or donation page as well, and that's something that you would get a wireframe for as well. So this is going to be based on everything that we had looked at previously, based on the user groups, based on the sitemap and how we want that content to be laid out. And this gives you the opportunity to define the placement of your different calls to actions and your different widgets as well. So maybe you have a calendar section that you want to have in a piece on the home page where people can click to see more events. Maybe you have a read more or a get involved button that you want to have in a certain spot. And all those placements should be justified by user group needs and goals too. And to show you an example of a wireframe, this one comes from the Youre Institute for Arts Education that we did for them. And so to kind of show you how to read this a little bit, at the top you've got 2 calls to actions, register for classes and register for camps that they definitely needed as something that their users want. You see their main navigation menu below that. And then you have their main slideshow banner for the homepage there too. And then as you scroll down, you'll see that there's kind of a quadrant for 4 different buttons there, one for theater, one for visual arts, one for music, and for dance. And since they're an art institute, those are the 4 main areas that they need people to go to. So based on what your art is, that's where you can go and find your pathway into the resources that you need. So let's go ahead and take a look at how that kind of translates into their live site. So there you see the calls to action at the top. You see the homepage slideshow as we scroll down there. You've got an even welcome section as you get into that main quadrant of calls to action. Once you hover over those buttons, they highlight a little bit so that you know you can click on it and it'll take you to another section with more information. And below that is where they have their upcoming events. You can see that 30-day calendar layout with the different events and read more buttons to register or just to find out more information. And they've also included a community outreach section as that's something that's important to their organization too. And to kind of round out that homepage, they've got their Facebook and Twitter feeds lined up so you can interact with them and link to their social media as well. So this is a really good way to see how that wireframe does kind of translate into a live site. Things might look a little bit different from the wireframe, since that portion is kind of just talking in boxes and grayscales, but that structure is going to be the foundation. And getting into one other important piece of user experience is kind of what we call donation experience, essentially. Whenever you are looking to get people to donate online, you want to make sure that their experience is well thought out and that it's enjoyable for them to be able to give you money. Charity Navigator tells us that online giving increased 23% last year, following a 15% growth in 2016. So 2018 is definitely on track to follow that same trend, with online giving increasing more and more. So kind of how do you start thinking about your donation experience on your website? The first question to ask would be is if you're currently accepting donations online, and then how? Do you have a standard PayPal button that you're using that kind of links to a form? Is it on-site or off-site? Do you have a third-party system who's kind of managing all of that? So that's kind of the first place that you'll want to get into to start thinking about your donation experience. And here we have another example that we want to share with you from the Dreamscape Foundation. They are an organization that helps all people all across the country living with disabilities. And we wanted to point them out because they have made a really interactive and engaging donation experience for people who are giving money. And this helps them to feel confident and comfortable when they do so. So let's go ahead and take a look at this one. If it wants to play for me here, there we go. So first you land on this page, you've got high impact visuals, and you see a box where you can enter your donation amount. You also have the option to give in honor of someone, and you know that this is where you're supposed to do that because that's directly where the page is leading you to do. You can give once, you can make it a monthly donation, and then it gives you the option to pay via PayPal or credit card. Some people find it easier through PayPal, maybe they have their account set up there already. And then when you do click on credit card, you get this lightbox pop-up form, and that remains interactive on the page. It doesn't take you anywhere else. The fields only ask you for the basic information that they need in order to process your donation, like name, email, street address. So it doesn't end up feeling like a job application where you have to put all this information in. You are able to give your donation, mark it as a recurring one, give in honor of someone, and put in your credit card, all within just a couple of form fields. So that's definitely an A+ donation experience from our point of view. And then kind of one last concept that we want to talk about is, in terms of user experience, is responsiveness. And this is probably a term that you've heard before, but for those who haven't, responsiveness refers to your website kind of breaking down and looking nice across all devices and sizes. So that goes from desktop to laptop to cell phone to iPad to Android, whatever it might be. You want to make sure that all those people are able to see your website in a really cool way and a user-friendly way too. So this is, again, the example from Roots and Wings. As you can see, their site broken down onto a smartphone where the content kind of collapses a little bit differently and everything still flows the way that it should. And this is an example of their site on a desktop. So instead of just thinking about mobile devices, we want to think about what happens whenever I have to shrink my internet browser. Maybe I need to look at a website and fill out an Excel document at the same time. You want that site to still be looking nice to that user. So you'll see up at the top, there's kind of a 3-lined icon. We call that the hamburger menu. And that's where the menu kind of collapses, and you can click on that to expand it and get those same navigation items that we saw previously. But this way it's maintained nice and neat. It's not pushed onto 2 lines. It's not scrunched together. It has its own little area to live. And this keeps the page looking clean and fresh, no matter what size you have it at. And then lastly, just to kind of give a little more of a holistic look as to what user experience is, it's essentially something that allows you to establish your organization's credibility and your trust. And that is what will make people convert into donors or volunteers or event registrants on your website. One thing that we talk about here is that part of a nonprofit's job is to always be showing their credibility and proving their credibility, whether it be asking for grants or getting people to get involved in whatever way that might be. And on your website, that should be no different. That same rule and those same principles apply. Essentially, the truth is that users don't volunteer, they don't register, and they definitely don't donate money if they're not comfortable doing it on your site. So if your site isn't giving them that positive feeling, if it's not evoking that kind of trustworthy, confident emotion, then it's less likely that they will be converting into engaged users. And so kind of where it keeps going with this whole notion of trust and credibility, apart from UX, is definitely in the content section. And both of these pieces work together to create that. So we'll kind of pass things over to Emma so she can walk us through that.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about content, which I'm really excited about. So like I initially said, I'm the content marketing growth manager here. I create a ton of content, and it's something I love to do, and I love to talk to nonprofits about it. So I am really excited to talk about it. And, you know, like Kyle said, having non-credible content is going to lead to a higher bounce rate. That just means that people aren't going to want to stay on your website if you have spelling errors, or if, you know, your content just isn't that fun to look at. People aren't going to stay. So we really want to talk about this and why it's so important, and why it's so important to look at the beginning of your website process. So we're just going to talk about the basics. Like I said before, we came back to this idea of a content audit. Kyle brought it up in UX, but I just want to talk about it again now. A content audit is at the beginning of your website build or a website redesign. You want to take stock of all the content that you have, and then the content that you need. So that means looking at the website you already have, if you do have one, and looking at the pages that you have. Is there outdated information there? I mean, do you have information from programs that no longer exist? Have your mission and values changed? Do you want to add a staff bios page? Hint, you do want to add a staff bios page. So you just want to take a whole holistic look at your content so that you really understand what it is you have and what it is you need. This is so important to do early. Content is one of those things that will hold up a web design process if you leave it until the end. Plus, you can't create quality content in a short period of time. You want to your content is your personality behind your website. You want your website to sing, and you can't do that if you don't give it the time that it needs. You need time to create engaging content. So I'm going to talk about different kinds of content. I think a lot of times when we say, just throw out the word content and we think text. I do mean text. It's really, really important. But there's also two other big sorts of content that exist when I'm talking in sort of this realm of content that exists for websites. I'm talking image and video. Similar, obviously, video being the animated. And when I say high quality image content, I do mean high resolution and relevant image content. This means that you want to have images that are related to what your nonprofit does. You want them to be, related either to what your programs, your mission and values, whatever that is. There is sort of a catch here. A lot of times nonprofits come to us and really want to use their own images, and that's awesome. Like we love when you have high quality images to show on your site. The truth is, though, that if that image was taken at a program event on someone's Android and it's kind of blurry, it's really not the right image to use on your website, even if it is of an actual event. And this is when Shutterstock comes in. Images on your website need to be high quality, and if they're not, it really doesn't work with your design. It ends up, doing your organization a disservice. So when it comes down to it, if you're looking at images that are of an event but poor quality, it's time to look to Shutterstock.
And stock photos are not to be afraid of. A lot of people say, oh, well, we want to make sure that it's original. And there are places to add that original content, but Shutterstock or any other stock photo are really going to bring out that design and that trust that we were talking about. It's
about relevance. That's really what it comes down to. If it's relevant content, then it's okay. Talking about an About Us video. We really recommend investing in one. It's a wonderful way to create engaging content online. I know that it's a little bit expensive. Some ways that some of the organizations we worked with have gotten around this is contacting local universities and, high schools, but more universities where students are studying filmmaking and want to put something on their resume. And it's a great way to get a really high quality video that helps you storytell. And then text, like I said before, but we'll come back to that right perfect now. So like Kyle said before, the big thing when you're writing for anything is you want to know who you're writing for. We're talking about your user groups here. Other terms when you look, maybe you look for writing for the web, you might see come up are things like buyer personas or target audience, but they all really mean the same thing. It means you need to know who your audience is when you're writing. So I'm going to break down some different, high school English terms here, but that are still really relevant for your website. So there are a couple things you want to nail down while you're creating your website content or re-editing your website content. The first thing is voice. So your voice is going to be an unchanging aspect of your writing for your nonprofit's website, and it's your nonprofit's personality. It's going to be slightly different, obviously, depending, because we all have different personalities, depending on what you do. A nonprofit that is works like Roots and Wings, for example, let's take them, who work with children aging out of the foster care system, is going to have a slightly different voice than someone who does international aid. It's just, there's going to be slightly different voices. But generally, it's best to keep it casual yet professional because we are writing for the web. Then you want to move into tone. This is like spoken tone, so it's going to change depending on the context. And the best way that I like to think about this is thinking about your buyer personas or your user groups. You want to think about what navigation path you're writing for at that specific moment. So maybe you're on the navigation path and it's something that most likely donors and volunteers are going to want to look at. Well, you're going to want to change your tone to talk to sort of those two user groups. But this tone is also going to remain within the larger personality that is your nonprofit's voice. Moving on to style. This is the sort of nuts and bolts of it. You're looking at grammar stuff, capitalization, Oxford comma stuff, things like that. It's not going to change. And we really recommend a brand and style guide. It really helped us when we put one together. Kyle and I have had many a war over the Oxford comma. So
absolutely, the branding guide and having a rule written down and set in place was the one to keep the peace around the office.
So we really recommend that and make sure that it ensures that everyone who's writing for your nonprofit is following the same rules. So then talking about structure and writing for the web and making sure your content is engaging. This is really important. You have about 7 seconds to make an impact on someone who's landed on your webpage, which means you don't have time to sort of, put in a nice flowery details. Like you really want to get to that point first. So you don't want to bury the lead. Make sure your most important information is first. And then following that, you want to make sure all of the text is scannable. That means headers and subheaders. That means short sentences and paragraphs. If I'm looking at your website, I should be able to understand essentially everything from just reading your title and your headers and subheaders. The next important thing is going to be SEO, but we'll come back to that. It's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. So these are just some general writing tips on writing for the web. I'm not going to talk about all of them because most people know them. I just think it's nice to have them there just to remind ourselves. I like to look at them sometimes. I tend to be very jargony and I'm really working on that. So, if you guys are having the same problems, remember that. I just want to highlight one thing, which is you want to stick around a 9th grade reading level. I know that a lot of your user groups probably are, read at a much higher level than this, but when we're reading on the web, it's supposed to be easily digestible. So you want people to get the information fairly quickly. If you're worried that your text or the text content that you're creating is a little too advanced or not advanced enough, there are really cool websites where you can submit your text to them and they will tell you what level you're writing at, what it's reading at, and sections you need to change.
Yeah, I know one that we've used previously is called Hemingway app, where you can just kind of copy and paste your text in and it highlights the different sections that you need to change to kind of bring the level up or down, whatever that might be.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about engaging content. I know this is something that we throw around all the time, and nonprofits come to us and ask, they're like, how do I make my content engaging? And there is no, like this is the answer, but there are definitely things you can do to make it more engaging. One of the best tips that I can give is making it people-centric. That means that having the people that you are, that are impacted by your organization telling stories. That means having your donors or volunteers or individuals who are actually receiving your services be the ones telling your stories. Having everything mission and values driven, pulling inspiration and making sure that all of your written content sort of, and text or written, sorry, and photo and video content is all sort of coming back and sort of tethered to your organization through your mission and values. It'll make your content more coherent and inspiring. Impact focus. Like Kyle was talking about, your site is about establishing your credibility online. People want to know that you're successful, and the best way to do that is show numbers. There are tons of engaging ways you can do this in terms of design, but making sure that those numbers are a part of what you're doing will make your content itself more engaging, and people will be even more excited to be a part of what you do. When we come to the balance of written and visual content, you want to lean on the side of photo. It's web design. I know that you do incredible things, and we know you do that, and you want to tell, and that's awesome. The thing is that when people are online, though, they just want to see it, and they want to be inspired by the visual imagery. So whenever you can, lean on the side of photo. Your CTAs. So I think Kyle mentioned them briefly earlier, but I'm just going to bring them up again. They're your calls to action. So these are anytime you're sort of you want your user to do something on your site. Generally, they're going to be a button, a donate button, or a get involved button. You want to make sure you're using actionable language there, verbs and things of that nature, so that people know that, oh, I'm supposed to do this here. It ensures that your user moves through that navigation path that you've set out for them, and it makes your site more engaging in general. Another great way to create engaging content, and I'm in charge of our blog here, so it's something that's near and dear to my heart, is having a blog. This allows you to focus more specifically on maybe specific programs, specific events, and it really allows your user to become more a part of what you're doing, even if maybe they're not there. And then it's also part of SEO, which we're going to talk about. Okay, so here we are to that scary word, search engine optimization. Some of you probably know what it is, maybe others don't. But just to sort of give a little rundown, search engine optimization is making sure that your website is being found given words related to what it is that you do. So it's sort of those words someone would put into Google, and where your organization falls on that Google search results page. It's really important that you look into this and make sure that you are SEO healthy, or else people aren't going to be able to find your organization. To use Roots and Wings for an example, just to sort of put us in the SEO mindset, when you're thinking about keywords, so these are the words that someone would put into a search engine. The keywords for Roots and Wings, the organization where young adults are aging out of the foster care system, things that someone might put into a search engine would be, and there are even they might be things you wouldn't think about. Something like children or young adult low cost housing. Mm-hmm. That's going to be something that individuals that are going to want to receive services from Roots and Wings, or individuals that maybe are interested in donating to services like Roots and Wings, or organizations like Roots and Wings, are going to be putting into the search engine.
Exactly. And if we think of kind of the average client of Roots and Wings, for example, the odds that they're going to go in there and say organizations helping those who have aged out of the foster system isn't all that likely. So when you kind of think outside the box and think of what that person is actually going to type into the search bar, that's when you really get things going.
Right, and maybe they do put that in, or maybe they don't. The idea is that you have multiple keywords that are associated with what your organization does, and these words are all in the head. You have to think through your users' point of view. What are they going to be using to find your organization? And then you want to use those words throughout your content as headers, subheaders, titles. This is why I say a blog is a really great way to do that, because you can target specific keywords related to your organization in a specific blog article, which is then connected to your website, and then people can find what you do via your blog. SEO can get a little, you can get deep into the woods here, but a really great way to do it is Yoast. They have a great plugin for WordPress and trainings if you want to look into them. It'll do content analysis for you, help you keyword research, things that maybe you're a little overwhelmed by or don't have time for. They can really help you with that.
Yeah, and if you do download the plugin on your site, it has a red, yellow, and green kind of indicator for each of your pages to let you know where you need to work on, what pieces are missing for that page to make sure that it's as optimized as possible.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that they're experts on SEO. I mean, Yoast has made their name just doing this. So, you know, if you're just getting started, their plugin is a great way to go. And that way you don't get too lost in the woods.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we just want to talk about must-have content just to make sure that your website is engaging and has all this, like checking all those boxes. I'm assuming that people, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, I don't know, that are checking in or are interested in our webinar because maybe you're starting a web design process or are in the middle of one. Well, these are just some pages, some content pages that I would, think about adding if you don't already have them. One of the big ones is a challenge page. This is sort of addressing the problem that your nonprofit is working to, fight, working to alleviate pain from X, Y, and Z. It's making an argument for why your organization exists. We've talked about this again. I'm gonna keep bringing it up, that it's an impact page. You want to show again that your organization is effective. I think I said this earlier, but staff and board information. This is about credibility, establishing trust. You want to show that there are people that are there and that are going to pick up the phone if someone calls, and it just makes your organization more accessible. Again, investing in this About Us video, really great must-have content. Mission and values written out, and then using those as inspiration for the other content that you're creating. This last point only applies to organizations that have volunteers. If you don't have volunteers, ignore this. You shouldn't have a volunteer page. It would be very confusing. But having a volunteer page if you do have volunteers, and that way they can find the information that they need. So now we're going to break down some examples from a couple pretty cool organizations in terms of both UX and content to give you some really great examples.
Yeah, definitely. So first we've got a video coming up from Pedal Revolution, followed by the American Brain Tumor Association that we've kind of looked at a little bit, and then the Dreamscape Foundation too that we saw.
And unfortunately, our audio isn't working on this video, but I think Abby is going to be sending out an email in the next couple of days, and you can watch the whole video there. For now, you're just going to have to hear my voice. I apologize. Okay. So I just wanted to show this to you guys because it's an example of a really great About Us video. Essentially, it is telling the story of how Pedal Revolution, this really, really cool nonprofit bike shop in San Francisco, which offers jobs to at-risk youth, helped a young man who lives in the San Francisco area. He tells his own story about how he gets involved in Pedal Revolution, sort of what his life was before, during, and then after Pedal Revolution, and how they've affected change in his life essentially. The things that I really want to talk about in this video, unfortunately you can't hear the audio, but it's really high quality, it's very well edited, and the visuals obviously are great. It's clear it's a professionally made video, and it's worth the investment. I mean, by the end of this video, I'm crying and I want to donate, like I'm in.
Exactly. And going to the point about how it tells the work of Pedal Revolution through the lens of a person who was impacted, keyword impact, by the organization, it kind of doubles for an About Us and an impact piece of content as well. So you kind of kill two birds with one stone at this point.
Exactly. And again, Abby's going to send this out after. I totally recommend checking it out. One, oops, did not pause that there. One, just because it's really great. It's really wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to let Kyle take UX first just because it makes more sense.
Okay, great. So looking at the American Brain Tumor Association website here, like we saw in our wireframe and the sitemap and the kind of the whole UX breakdown, we're seeing some of these things repeated here. So we see different calls to actions that are placed on the site. We see different icons for social media. We see our main navigation menu as well. But I really want to draw attention to the bottom left there, where you have kind of that blurb supporting you through your journey, and those two buttons at the very bottom. So the one button says for patients and the other for caregivers. And there immediately, patients and caregivers, we know that those were two highly prioritized and predefined user groups. Those two buttons basically represent two different pathways for those user groups to get the resources that they need. And we can even see that the caregivers one is highlighted in color. Maybe that one did take a little bit of a higher priority than the patient's one. But I think it's really important to call these out because right from when you land on a site, you've got these two clear pathways that are clearly marked and you know exactly where to go.
And then in terms of content here, I really want to draw our attention to visual content. You'll see the image to text ratio. It's all image here. It is an image of a family indicating family values, which is really important for this organization. And the text that they've chosen to place is sparse, but it is well thought out, supporting you through your brain tumor journey. It's clear what the organization does, and you want to learn more. Always going to point out that donate button. It's great. Always love it. And then something that's really cool about this site, this I guess would be more of a UX thing, but I love it because it's really cool, is if you see in the right corner, there is a little wheelchair icon. And this is an accessibility menu showing that they've thought about different users that might be using their site and making it accessible for everyone.
And then as you kind of scroll a little bit further down their homepage, you come to this About Brain Tumors section. And similarly to what we saw before, I want to call out those calls to action here. Towards that bottom right, we see newly diagnosed, click here. And below that, more about brain tumors. So again, maybe one of their defined user groups was newly diagnosed patients. And that even there gives them a direct pathway to information that they might need that might be very specific to them and different from anyone else who maybe was diagnosed a time ago. And then below that, at the More About Brain Tumors button, you know that you have an About section with more general information that can kind of get you to other areas of the site. But again, calling out that call to action, that is definitely giving a clear pathway to those who are newly diagnosed and with actionable language.
So I just want to point out here the structure of how the content is laid out. One, you have a filtered image in the background, which is lovely, and then you have headers and subheaders. It breaks down the information, making it really easily scannable. They also have numbers here, which is great eye-catching things that make for very engaging content. It makes the user sort of drawn to that information.
And then on this part too, I mean, Emma and I can both talk about this section because it's impact. It's a word that we both use a lot today.
I'm so sorry, we use it constantly.
we use it a lot because it's really important. It's very important. But I want to call out on the right side the way that the numbers are being kind of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Highlighted.
Highlighted, thank you.
You're welcome.
That one was escaping me for a second. But those numbers are highlighted. And immediately on the homepage, we can see how they're making an impact, how many people are helping, what kind of money they're using, and how it's being raised. So for me, it's a 10.
Yeah, and again, just coming back to how the text is being broken down, you have your headers and then sort of information that's important is being highlighted. It's not overwhelming in the amount of information that's there. They've kept it pretty simple, as well as like a wonderful image, again, showing family values on the side. First of all, they are the cutest. I think we'll agree, like the cutest.
Okay, so then going back to Dreamscape, we had seen their donation page previously, but this time we want to call out that read more button at the very bottom, kind of that horizontal light blue box. And this is an accordion tool, and what that does is when you click on it, it just expands with more text. So what they've done here on their About Us page is given us their mission statement, the necessary information, and they've given us the option to continue reading if we want to. So that makes the site engaging, interactive. It puts the control and the power into the user being able to say, hey, if you want more, here it is. If not, we don't want to bother you with it. So if there is something like that that might be a little bit longer on your site, this could be a really good option for you too. But I really like the way that it was put to use here.
Yeah, I agree. And it is an interior page. A lot of times interior page ends up coming out a little more text heavy as it is. And the way they've decided to, address this sort of text heaviness is really great because like Kyle said, you are able to access the information if needed. Not needed, you don't need to. I also want to say that it's not expanded right now. I mean, I know you can't really see the bottom, but take my word for it, it's not expanded. And so the balance again of image to text, you have more images than you do text, really great. And
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is a little further down on the page. So this is, again, another example of their Accordion tool. These goals were really important for the organization to talk about. But again, they understand that maybe it's not important for everyone, and they want to give the option of reading that. This is on the same page. So there is other imagery on there, but we're really focusing on the Accordion tool here.
And the interactivity and the way that it keeps you engaged, you can kind of expand and minimize as you go along. It kind of helps to create that emotion or to create some kind of feedback within a user while they are using your site.
Mm-hmm. Makes them want to stay.
Exactly.
That's what we want. We want them to stay. Oh, sorry.
We jumped the summary slide.
Jumped the slide. No, we need it. It's so important.
So as we kind of wrap up everything here today, we wanted to kind of revisit some of those main points that we had, and the most important one being that everything is about your user, and that's kind of where everything should be coming from and where things should be justified. And as you do that and you keep thinking about your user, you're going to help establish your nonprofit's credibility. And don't forget that a picture can definitely be worth 1,000 words, and keeping those images high quality and plentiful. And then lastly, investing can be a really good idea sometimes. We know that in the nonprofit world that these resources are not easy to come by, but we have seen a lot of moments where people have to redo things, or it doesn't last as long as they've wanted to. So being able to invest a little bit of time and capital into something like this will definitely get you the most longevity out of it.
Yeah, 100%. It's worth it. So thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear from you guys. So I know we're gonna have a little question and answer that Abby is gonna moderate, but if you have any other questions, we don't get to your questions, please oh my gosh, it's the end of the webinar, I can't even speak. Please feel free to reach out to us. We would love to talk to you. It would be great.
Yeah, you can reach us directly via email or on our website, whatever, or social media, whatever way is easiest.
Yeah, and we want to thank Abby so much for having us. We met her at the Nonprofit Technology Conference this year, and it was great. So
yeah, thank you, Abby.
Yes, it was so good. Well, I do have a couple of questions for you guys, and I know that you and I have actually talked about them in person before. So I got one question. If someone is just getting started, either on building their first website or working on a website redesign, what's the first thing they do? And can you suggest any resources for people who are kind of trying to plan a website for the first time?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways that you can kind of get going on this. Before you do get started, you definitely want to make sure you have your domain registered. So that's going to be the portion, the .com essentially. So for us, our domain is elevationweb.org. And those are things that you have to purchase online. GoDaddy is the biggest domain and hosting seller or provider, but there are different ways that you can find those. There's a bunch of different websites that sell them. You can just kind of Google that domain or Google places to buy domains, and you definitely want to make sure that you're able to get your own. And then from there, kind of getting in touch with a vendor at that point.
Well, I mean, even before the vendor, I would say, like we said, I always think it's nice for an organization to sort of take stock of what their website is now and what they want to, see moving forward. And then if you are thinking of embarking on a web design project, knowing what your budget is organizationally speaking, and then knowing what channels, because once you get into your web design process, you're going to have sort of approval processes within an organization. And sort of getting those nailed out ahead of time can really help the process. So do you need board member approval? Who needs to be involved in those meetings? I would just get all of that stuff out of the way.
Yeah, as a former project manager, that would definitely help a lot. We've seen a lot of delays, just kind of waiting on approvals from different people.
Right, so that would be sort of like taking stock of your content, looking at your website, what it is you need, making sure that the right voices are going to be in the room when you're coming in for feedback, and making sure that initial voices, like everyone sort of heard initially, and that way moving forward, you don't have people coming back saying, hey, I didn't get to talk about this or that,
Those are really good tips, Emma.
Yeah, and that applies to so many things. I know for-profits and nonprofits face that same struggle, and getting everybody in the same room can help mitigate so many issues that you wouldn't even anticipate coming up. I'm also going to do this thing where I plug the website that I feel like I plug every webinar. If anybody, have you guys ever looked at sofii.org, SOFII.org?
It rings a bell, but I'm not the most familiar.
I can only think Sophie short.
I know. If anybody wants examples of really beautiful content, well-written content, and content that includes amazing pictures or videos, check out that website. They highlight some of the best campaigns that nonprofits all over the world run. So if you need inspiration, or if you want to see what other people are doing with their content, they have videos, they have donation forms, they have web pages, they have emails, all featuring really beautifully written content with gorgeous images. So that's my favorite website probably of all time. So I suggest that on the reg. Kind of going along that, once you have everybody in a room, you've decided who needs to be working on this project. Jessica Feely asked us a question. After that's all set up, do you have any general advice on the use of sidebars on internal pages to support navigation? Is that a do or don't? Are there do or don'ts associated with that?
Yeah, I mean, it can come down to personal preference, but it's something that we do recommend. We put sidebars on all of the internal pages of the websites that we make. So yeah, there are definitely ways to break that up too. Maybe you have the navigation for that section. So for example, maybe if you're in the About Us tab, and under that you have the subpages, our team, our board, our story, you can kind of have that navigation box in the sidebar. You can have your upcoming events in the sidebar. You can have a Facebook feed in the sidebar, or it could just be kind of a plain box where you can put in different images and text. But that's definitely something that we recommend, that we use on all of our websites. It helps to kind of keep things a little more navigatable, if that's the word for navigationable. But yeah, that's definitely something we recommend.
Perfect. And I'll ask you this. One question that I get a lot about website design is actually related to navigation bars, either sidebars or at the top on donation forms. Do you guys suggest removing the navigation items from a donation form to kind of keep people attentive, or do you like to leave those navigation items for consistency's sake?
So when we get to a donation form, generally we recommend actually taking away the navigation menu. So once you get to donation, this is our best practice. Obviously, we've had organizations that have made different decisions. So actually, the example we showed you, the navigation remained on there. Generally, we like to signify to the user that a different action is meant to be completed on this. We don't want it to be distracting. And then after they've completed their donation, then they can be redirected back to the site. That's generally what we recommend. There have been very effective sites that haven't done that, but that would be the best sort of UX practice.
Yeah, like rule of thumb, just give them the least amount of opportunities to click away at that point. Sure.
That's really helpful. I've gotten a lot of different answers, but none as definitive as that one. So that's very helpful. On the next question I kind of have is actually probably targeted more towards Emma because it's more content concerned. If someone is not familiar with SEO at all, and maybe, I mean, they might be using Yoast if they have WordPress, but I know a lot of our clients use different platforms. Where can a nonprofit fundraiser or content writer or marketer go to learn about basic SEO?
So here's the thing, is Yoast doesn't just have this plugin, they also just have courses. So I'd recommend checking out Yoast.com and just checking out their courses. Because they have the most thorough ones that I have seen. You don't have to do the plugin or anything, but they'll give you sort of other advice and other things that you can do. There are a couple of other SEO experts. Whoever you are, please reach out to me after because I can't think about them. I don't have their names at the tip of my tongue, but there's some really great blogs out there that'll give you just sort of more basic information.
Wonderful. I know SEO can be kind of a beast, but for those of you who are kind of concerned about getting your feet wet in the SEO world, you can accomplish a lot with very basic tools. So you'll hear people use all kinds of crazy jargon and acronyms and reference all these crazy tools, and don't let that intimidate you. You can accomplish a lot with very little.
100%.
For sure. That is the last question that I had. So we are actually going to be able to wrap up a little bit early. Emma and Kyle, you did a fantastic job. Anybody who has questions, Emma and Kyle have given you their email addresses. If you are a QGIF client and you have questions about how to apply any of this to your QGIF forms, you can absolutely reach out to me and I will get you in touch with the right person. Emma and Kyle, thank you so much for your time. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much for having us. We had a great time.
Yeah, this was great. It was great to work on this again and to be back in touch after seeing each other. So thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And everybody, keep your eye out on your inbox over the next couple of days. I will have an email to you with a recording, with a list of some resources, and with a note about our next webinar. So keep an eye on that. I hope you have a wonderful Thursday. You're almost at the weekend. Good job. And we will talk to you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.